Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for tonight's SIF 45 Streams Happy Hour, who is sponsored by Great Lakes Brewing Company. I am Debbie Samples, and I'm the Marketing and Media Director of the Cleveland International Film Festival. Our friends at Great Lakes Brewing Company encourage you to put your phone down during this happy hour and consider replacing it with a fresh Great Lakes beer. And let's be honest, I'm never one to pass up on great advice. So now that we all have our beer up and our phones down, I would like to introduce Kelly Parker from the Cleveland Hearing and Speech Center, who will be interpreting for us during the first half of our program tonight. Thank you for being here, Kelly. Each night of the festival, our filmmakers and guests answer your questions about their films. If you're watching live, I would encourage you to ask a question. Just use the YouTube chat feature over to the right-hand side. Our moderators will be selecting questions to put to the filmmakers and our guests. So on tonight's happy hour, we are getting sexy as we will be joined by guests from the documentaries A Sexplanation and The Dilemma of Desire. And now we'll start with our first segment led by none other than SIF Artistic Director, Mallory Martin.
Thanks, Debbie. I'm Mallory Martin. I'm the Artistic Director for SIF, as Debbie said, and I am so excited to introduce our special guests from the hilarious and informative documentary, A Sexplanation. I'm happy to introduce director, co-writer, co-editor Alex Liu and co-writer Leo Neri. Hi, guys. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having us.
All right, so let's get started. I feel like we should have kicked this off with Salt and Pepper. Like, I wish we could have intro music. That would have been
perfect. Yeah.
That would have been perfect. So first of all, thank you guys so much for making this film, and Alex for being the one to navigate us through this investigation and opening up of your own personal life, because I think that was really the only way to make this film successfully, and you definitely succeeded. I mean, the conversations with your parents, masturbating in an MRI, excuse the pun, but I mean, that takes some serious balls, I think, to do that. So I want to start off by thanking you for making such a great film. And I'd really like to start off by finding out where both of you are at in terms of your own sexuality these days. And since making this film, do you feel less shamed, more in tune with your own sexuality, and how has this film changed your lives? Alex, do you want to start?
Question. I think, I don't know if less shame is the way I would frame things, but I am more present to the shame I have quicker, and am able to work through it a lot easier. You know, I think I didn't realize how much shame I really still carried before starting this movie. And as I kind of talked to all the different educators and researchers, you realize just how much it's like the air we breathe when it comes to sexual shame. Just being in a body, you know, being comfortable expressing desire and pleasure. But now I catch it quicker. I'm able to understand what's going on in a given moment and express what I want much more easily now. Yeah.
That's so great.
I think similarly, throughout the journey of making a movie, I think I've kind of evolved in terms of being able to catch myself and to kind of withhold those quick snap judgments that we all kind of usually slip into without even being that aware. So just being more aware. However, during pandemic, it's been such a tricky time to be present in my body and to like honor the feelings that I'm feeling. So it's been like this tricky tightrope walk of almost ignoring my carnal needs, and so now trying to, as we're kind of reaching hopefully the end of the tunnel with the light at the end, hopefully trying to be more present and kind of reclaim being a human being in a body. Yeah, interesting.
I think that's such a good point. I think that I think we've all been craving not only human connection but human touch. And for those of us who are living with partners, that's one thing, but there's a whole group of people out there who've been living alone during this time. And I think I talked to a friend of mine about this actually during the pandemic, about how I feel like that's going to be sort of, or at least it has been this last year, like the next kind of social divide. And so it's really interesting that you bring that up. And I wonder what it's going to be like for us kind of coming out of that shell and having to sort of relearn our whole sexuality with other people all over again. So thanks for bringing that up. Great point. Can you guys talk a little bit? I feel like some people still don't understand that documentaries still have to be written in many ways, and I think it might be a little more clear in this documentary, especially because you have some great narratives like throughout the whole film. But Leo, can you talk a little bit about writing this with Alex and what that process was like for you guys?
Yeah, so I mean, this is in a lot of senses, in a very obvious sense, we're following Alex's journey and Alex's story. At the same time, we're trying to also tell a larger narrative about our collective relationship with sex and our bodies and sexuality. So the process of writing a story is trying to weave together, not just one narrative, but two narratives, and hopefully find a narrative arc and have them crisscross throughout the process. So, and the process of writing with someone like Alex, who's willing to be so open and figuratively and literally naked, he's not that naked in the movie, but to bear so much of himself, it's such an honor to work with somebody who is willing to put their story out there, is so intellectually curious, and is willing to bring everyone along on his journey. So it was a great opportunity to explore this topic in a light, approachable, hopefully embracing the awkward, and to really lean into the fun where it definitely could be dark. Yeah.
Story. I mean, there were so many nights and days that Leo and I sat and just divulged kind of all of our, just try to get all of it out, all the kind of things that we'd blocked out, all the kind of moments of discovering sexuality. So even though it is, technically telling my story, so much of it is Leo's and other people in our lives as well.
That's great. So speaking of the kind of serious parts about the film too, I am going to go there early on, just to ask this question earlier. I want to ask you, Alex. You specifically open up about your struggle with your own homosexuality when you were younger, so much so that you considered suicide at one point. And thank you for sharing your story about that in the film, which so sadly is not uncommon for homosexual teenagers. In the film, you talk to your parents about being gay, but I was wondering if you'd be willing to talk about, before this film, had you ever talked to your parents about your previous thoughts of suicide? And what was their reaction like?
As you can tell in the film, my parents and I were very close, but I disconnected from them so much by the time I was around 17. And they knew something was wrong, but they didn't know what it was. And thankfully, they were, they didn't let it go. They were there for me. They just over and over again, many different ways. They let me know that I could tell them anything. So eventually I did. I told them all my thoughts and my, the plans I had at that time. And I'm lucky. I'm so lucky that my parents were immediately put me into therapy, immediately, started to find other gay people in the community to get to know. And, but by the time I was in my early 20s, we were all going to Gay Pride in San Francisco. It was a very, very happy ending in that sense. It was I couldn't be luckier.
That's so great. It's really good to hear. Yeah, your parents are amazing. I love that you included them and your grandma in the film.
Yeah.
So you guys interviewed an impressive amount of professionals in the film. What was the research like to find all of them? Did you know about most of them already, especially with your experience, Alex, as a health reporter, or was that sort of part of the journey of discovery along the way?
Some of it is books I read and people who are quoted, and you find them, and then they tell you about someone we need to talk to. So some of the, I think one of the most powerful interviews in the film, Kristen Gilbert, was just a referral. We didn't know what to expect when we sat down with her, and that totally shifted the whole movie and our whole ideas about sex and sexuality. So I mean, and unfortunately, there's probably, I don't know, like 12, 13 people we talked to that didn't make the cut, just because it's such a broad topic. There's so many ways you can go with it. And it was a real education. Yeah.
Leo, were you part of the research for that too, in terms of deciding who to interview?
Yeah, I think Alex did a lot of luckily we have Alex's journalistic background to lean on and God bless you, or sexual God bless you. So he definitely laid the framework for how to approach what we're researching, how we're researching. But yeah, as we're starting to dig into the story, we start to find that, it might be interesting to have like a sociological perspective or historical perspective. So it would just become, it's kind of sad the dearth of information there is in terms of sex and sexuality. So it's kind of the top names bubble up to the top very quickly. So you're able to find a direction to run in.
Right.
Yeah, which speaks to the larger problem of like, we need to have more options and more people studying this subject, right?
Right. Well, that's a good segue into my next question, I love that you start the film off making the declaration that we as a society both fear and are obsessed with sex. I think it fits the notion that you fear what you don't know. And so the logical thing would be education, right? And particularly comprehensive sex education, as you guys talk about a lot in the film, including porn literacy, which I'm going to have a follow-up question about in a second. But for those who are just starting on that path, whether it's parents talking to their children or adults like you trying to educate themselves, where do they start? What are the best resources to turn to? You guys talk to a lot of really great resources, but I think for the average person, they don't even know where to start sometimes and where to look and find the best, most accurate information.
Unfortunately. You have a suggestion, Leo?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think your sound cut out a little bit, but I think the very first thing, and then Alex, I think the easiest, most accessible thing you could do in terms of finding information is the immediate world around you in terms of just having conversations. So just taking the first step to even ask yourself internally and to start slowly putting out feelers externally, because I don't think we are that good at having frank conversations with our friends, with the people we trust, the people we love. And when it comes to our sexuality, that being such a core component of who we are as human beings, and then not sharing that with the people around you, it's almost as though you are completely just hiding part of your existence from people that are supposed to know you the best. So I think having conversations is maybe the first step in terms of just looking for information. And then from there, probably more scientific.
Yeah.
If you want something, just some basics, go to your local Planned Parenthood. Unfortunately, it's harder and harder in some states to find them, but they're going to be the best resource for you in your community. Because I think sex is so tied into the cultural values of your community. Planned Parenthood is going to be the best place just to know who are the most culturally competent people around to kind of talk about sex and sexuality for you, your family, yourself, whomever. But then there are amazing books. I would recommend "Come As You Are" by Emily Nagoski, a great book about sexual dysfunction. We call dysfunction, but really it's just normal sexuality and how to think that through. And then if you really want to go to how do you think about your life, I would recommend The Ethical Slut. It's a little of a provocative book, but it's just a great kind of. It is like a handbook. It's like a workbook almost of deconstructing your sexual values and biases and seeing if they still work for you, and if they don't, figuring out how you want to move forward.
I love the title of that book, so I'm definitely going to be.
It's a reclamation of the word slut. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with being a slut. Yeah.
Right. No, I love that. And I'm actually just going to take a minute. I love that you brought up Planned Parenthood because, sorry, but Planned Parenthood is just such an important resource for everybody for so many topics. And one of the things that I learned about this last year that I loved is their new app called Roo, ROO, which is specifically for adolescents. It's an app that they can text any questions that they have about sexuality, and they'll get professional, accurate responses with no judgment. And I thought when I learned about that for the first time, for those of you that don't know about it, check it out, because I think and I don't know if there's an age range on there, if they have an age range that they suggest to use it for, but I know that it's geared towards adolescents, and especially through puberty. I'm like, oh my God, if we had something like that when we were growing up in the 90s, just about like all the weird smells and like things that you never wanted. Like, I mean, you definitely didn't talk to your parents about, but like some of them, sometimes you didn't even want to talk to your friends about because you were embarrassed. And so I just feel like, oh my God, like if we had information about that, to be like, no, that's normal. You're okay. I just think, how different would things be now, you know?
Information, even just things like it's okay to masturbate, you know, anal sex is something people do, you know, just simple things like that. Very, very factual. There's no real value around that. I think could have gone a long way for a lot of us. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I think it was Kristen Gilbert who said maybe like my favorite line in the film when she is talking about, and this is going back to the porn that I wanted to talk about too, and about, you know, I love that you defend porn in the film, but also make the point that we have to educate ourselves about porn too, and we can't be just sheltering, especially young people, from it constantly without explaining to them that, yeah, okay, this is what anal sex looks like in porn. This is what anal sex looks like in real life, you know? And I think it was Kristen that said something about, you know, saying like, yeah, that's a bum. There's things that come out of it. And I just think like so I just think there were such great points in the film, such great like moments of revelation, that if you do strip away the fear from it, it does just become about education and about empowering ourselves, and to learn more about our bodies. So thank you guys again for that. My last question for you two before turning it over to the audience, is the same question that you asked many interviewees in your film, which is, how do you define sex? Which is
it's a constantly shifting thing, and I think that it's for my entire life. My definition of sex will change a little bit based on where I am in my life. You know, you know, I think about sex much more on a spectrum now. You know, before I think I would have said it had to be genital penetration, there had to be an orgasm involved. I would think very, you know, binary or maybe around sex. But now I think about sex on so much more of a continuum. Like even this conversation right now, it's great. We're having a pleasant talk. You know, there's a sexual component to that in the sense that it's a pleasurable human connection, you know, and if we think about sex more along those lines, and that at all points in our lives where we can't hide that yearning for connection, whether that's physical, although I think, you know, the more physical it gets, kind of the more sexual it gets. But at its core, you know, good sex is an amazing human spiritual connection, and that's kind of where I'm at right now with sex.
Alex stole my answer.
We've talked a lot about what is sex for many, many years. Yeah.
I guess the only thing I'll add that won't be a definition is just to think of it as sex is uniquely yours. And I sincerely, 7.8 billion people, like 7.8 billion distinct sexualities, however many people there are in the world. Sex is immutable, so you can't run away from it. So you definitely should. There should be no shame around your impulses.
I love that. All right, thank you guys. I'm gonna take a couple questions from the audience. Aaron is asking, can you ask Alex to commit to including the outtakes on the DVD, the credits for A Riot?
Yes, we have a lot of outtakes, and great answers that just didn't fit in the film. So definitely, they're all ready to go.
Actually, that leads me to another question. I'm sure that there always ends up being interviews and clips left on the cutting room floor. Is there anyone that in particular that you wish you could have squeezed into the film still that you can remember?
For me, we actually, when we were in Utah, we spoke to a Mormon bishop who really, you know, towed the party line when it came to homosexuality. And it was only when a woman named Stephanie Larson, seriously doing the Lord's work, in that she put a gay youth center right across from the temple in Provo, Utah, a very conservative town. With the only rules there is that you can't express hate. It's a love-only place. So gay people, gay families go, and they just do things that the community does. Like they bake cookies, they do homework, they play music, and the kids are like great examples of human beings. They go out and they mow people's lawns. They do all the things that Mormons do in Provo, Utah, but they just happen to be gay. And it really started to change hearts and minds around, I've never really spoken to a gay person before. This Mormon bishop was really questioning where he was. And after meeting all these kids, he was kind of having a real, existential crisis in many ways about, what do I actually believe and why do I actually believe it? And unfortunately, it just didn't fit in terms of really talking about sex education. But there are lots of people out there who are doing work like that, where they're just trying to de-shame situations so people can get to know each other as human beings and see each other that way.
Right. That's great. All right. Question from Paul. You shared so much. What is your favorite thing? Oh, I'm sorry. I totally just stole your question, Paul. He said, I guess maybe there could be another, or maybe Leo, you can answer this one. What is your favorite thing that ultimately didn't make it into the film? Sorry, Paul.
I mean, that segment is actually probably one of the best. I mean, I will say there's so much other stuff on the cutting room floor. Our Pornhub interview, we had to completely chopped down to such a small little nugget. There's a lot of funny, insightful information that's taken from the Pornhub Insights that they produce an annual report, which you can actually look up online. But yeah, that's something we had to cut just to do the other end of the spectrum, from heart-touching to pretty ridiculous and hilarious.
Right. And I love that you guys were able to interview someone from Pornhub. I loved the statistics reading about that, especially between like males and females and what their most search for stuff is. I think porn is fascinating. I think that's like a whole total part of the psyche that just is not explored enough. So thanks for getting to that guy, because that was great. All right. So we have from N Samples. What during the making of this doc, an interview, interaction, or just a thought from someone you interviewed that really caught you off guard or touched you in a way that you didn't expect? That's a great question.
I mean, I would say it's probably, you touched on one, Kristen Gilbert. At one point in the movie, she gives a definition of sex that it was just a complete catalyst for the narrative of this movie. To make us focus more on, instead of the physiological, biological, scientific exploration of sex and sexuality, that it ended up hinging more on the connection aspect, the human aspect. And I think that really changed the tone and narrative of the movie.
In a weird way, I feel like sex is so much more sacred. We talked to a Catholic priest in the film, and I did not expect to walk away from that interview really questioning, am I ignoring the spiritual aspect of sex? I think for so long, because the Catholic Church has been so anti-gay, gay sex to me has kind of almost been a political act, a middle finger to the Catholic Church. And I wasn't thinking about the sex in terms of how is it actually, fueling my spirit and soul. And hearing his fight to try to get the Catholic Church to speak more honestly, and where people are around sex, the questions they really have about sex. They want to know, how do I incorporate my sex into a moral, ethical, spiritually fulfilling life? And the way he framed sex made me really question, I should think about this a lot more, because I might be approaching this in a somewhat unhealthy way.
Okay, we have another question from Eric. I'm so glad somebody asked this. How awkward was the MRI experience, really?
It was very, very anxiety-ridden, not erotic experience at all. They start the timer. You got 10 minutes. You got to go through all the different, that we kind of go through the movie, but they need you to stimulate pretty much your whole body. And you have about 2 inches to work with, and so it's a very kind of like a technical experience. But we got it done right at the buzzer. But it was like a countdown from 10, and then we made it happen at the end somehow.
Oh my gosh, that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. Sex is not good under pressure. Sex is not good under pressure.
Right. Leo, did you partake in the MRI experience?
I did not. That Alex's contribution to humanity and Alex.
That's great. All right. Well, I have one final question for you guys too, which can you just talk a little bit about the plans for the film moving forward, if you have them yet. Is there somewhere that people will be able to see your film later on that you know of, or is there any plans to make a sequel?
Not a sequel yet, but
Okay.
yeah, I mean, we're hoping that people will be able to watch it somehow widely nationwide by the end of the year. So hopefully, we're in talks now to hopefully get it to a wider audience. So we're working hard on that right now. Yeah.
That's great. Great. All right. Well, I think we're about out of time, but I just want to thank you both so much for joining us here tonight. If you guys, most of you hopefully have watched the film already who are watching this now. If you haven't, go watch it. If you have, make sure to vote for the film for a chance to give this film a chance to win some cash prizes. You can vote with the star rating system right on our virtual cinema platform. All right. Well, thank you so much, Leo. Thank you, Alex, for being here. Thanks for sharing your film with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening.
All right, and I will hand things back over to our host, Debbie, to introduce the second half of tonight's show. Oh, Deb, I think you're muted.
Hello. I'm back. I gotta find my script now. I just want to do a special thanks to Karen Schiller for being here with us tonight. She will be our interpreter for the rest of the evening, and she's from the Cleveland Hearing and Speech Center. We want to take a minute as we transition into the second half of tonight's happy hour to thank all of our special guests and our audience for raising a glass with us tonight. We wouldn't be here without your ongoing support to bring film home. So thank you. We also want to take this moment to ask you to please consider contributing to our challenge match to support the future of the festival. Our goal this year is to reach $145,000, and we are so grateful for any amount you are able to give. If you are able to donate, please visit clevelandfilm.org/donate. And now we will head into tonight's second half featuring the documentary, The Dilemma of Desire. And there they are.
Here we go. All right, Debbie and I are so excited to tag team moderate this Q&A for The Dilemma of Desire, which was actually one of the films we played in another film festival that Debbie and I helped start this summer called Repro Film Festival. It's a festival, along with our co-founder, Leela Meadow-Connor. We created a film festival all about reproductive justice, and we could not have been more thrilled to partner on SIF's screening of The Dilemma of Desire this year, a film that just screams reproductive justice. So hi, Maria, Sophia, and Stacy. It's so good to see you all again. I'm going to let Debbie introduce officially each one of you.
Yes, we are so happy to have everybody here. We again want to welcome director, producer Maria Finizzo, and subject and artist Sophia Wallace, and subject of the film, Dr. Stacy Dutton. And before we get started, sorry about this, Mal. Before we get started, I do want to share a moment I had with Mal back in 2020 when she, Leela, and I were programming Repro, which she just spoke about. And Mal said that we had to see this film, one, because she knew we would just love everything about it, which she was right, but two, because it is so empowering. And so she was so empowered by it. She declared very loudly that she was never having sex without an orgasm again. So clearly I was sold. And she wasn't wrong. This film is a game changer on so many levels. So now that we talked about Mallory's orgasm, I think we can get started.
Thanks, Deb. All right, and I just have to start off too by acknowledging that The Dilemma of Desire was in our lineup for SIF 44 last year. And it was one of the very few films that we included again this year because I demand that everybody sees this film, whether you have a vagina, you like vaginas, or come from a vagina. So everyone, it's high time you got to know about the clitoris. So I even made my parents watch this film together, which was great experience for them. And I just want to thank all three of you, incredibly inspirational women, for teaching me more about my own body, because it's been life-changing, as Debbie said. So thanks again for joining us. Thank you so much for being here, all three of you.
Thanks for having us.
I mean, that was the best introduction I think I've ever gotten. So thank you.
Oh, that's great. All right. So actually, my first question is for you, Maria. In your original Kickstarter video, which I loved so much, you said that this is not a film about the clitoris, that it's a film about equality and the right as women to have our truth about our lived experiences acknowledged, respected, and valued. Can you talk more about this and what you want audiences to gain most from watching your film?
So one of the reasons that I said that, and I say that over and over again, is because there's such a fear about talking about the clitoris among people, and they think, oh no, this is going to really upset me, I don't want to do it, and all that. And so I veered away from saying, okay, this isn't really a film about the clitoris, it's a film about equality and the rights of all bodies, as Sophia has so eloquently put in one of her laws, to be entitled to the pleasure they're capable of. And for women, or anyone born female, our experiences in life are frequently ignored. They're not considered valuable. They're not. We're not given a voice to say what they are. And it's came to me that just sex, the sexual experience among certainly heterosexual women, was one that just reinforced that notion that whatever our experience was, it didn't really matter. Right? It really didn't matter whether we have an orgasm or not. It's really about your partner's pleasure. And so that's what we walked around thinking was our bar. That's what we had to meet. We wanted them to get off, but it didn't really matter if we did. And so to me, that really is a really fundamental way of looking at equality. I mean, if as a human being, the right to the knowledge of your body and the way it works isn't something that's a given, then all of the other things that come after that are going to be impossible to achieve, right? So lying to somebody about the way their body works is the way it means you can lie to them about anything. And so for me, it really is a film about equality. And it's not, equality of orgasms, that's part of it, but it's the equality of being seen as a human being with the right to experience all that encompasses as a human being in equal measure with the rest of society.
I love that. And I like how you touched, and speaking of just like all bodies, everyone matters. And Sophia, this question is directed towards you because in our society, there are 1,000 rules on who gets to be proud of their bodies. And women, who are more than half of the population, are even made aware from a very early age that we should be embarrassed to have our bodies talked about or seen in their natural state unless it's there to be sexualized. And you blew that concept up with your 2012 installation of the 100 Laws of Cliteracy. And I would love to hear you speak towards the origin of cliteracy and the Get Cliterate movement.
Great question. Gosh. It's hard to know where to begin, but I think I had a pedagogical clitoridectomy, just like almost all of us in the world, meaning that I wasn't taught about my clitoris accurately. And all of the images that I learned about what sex was always showed the vagina and penetration as being the way that women would receive pleasure. And I remember as a child being kind of confused because, learning about, menstruation and using tampons and being like, I don't feel my sensation there. I feel it here, but no one talks about this part of my body. It's not acknowledged. And then you learn about how boys are sexual and how girls are reproductive. And you can't really talk about a sexual girl without her being an object for consumption and therefore like a whore and a fallen woman and a slut and all these things. So there's no like natural sexuality that is sort of allowed for people that have girlhoods. And so this is something that I had, been thinking about for a long time. And then as a queer person, I very quickly realized that the kind of sex that I was having was radically different than what my straight female friends were having. And not only did they think that like they weren't entitled to pleasure, but like they weren't having like a orgasm, let alone 3 or 5. And with my partners, there was never a question about that my clit would be addressed, that the goal of intimacy was pleasure for both of us. And it was just such an interesting thing to see how entirely, gaslit we have all been to be told that our bodies are dirty and gross. We should be ashamed of them. They're difficult. They're, if you engage them in a way that actually works for them, that's foreplay. That's not real sex. It's kind of a drag. Like, it takes too long. It's too hard. You're asking too much. And all of these things. And I just, as someone who's trained in photography, I just got fed up with like all of the visual representation of sex and sexuality, excluding the clit. And I was like, this is so absurd. I just have to call this out. Like, I'm sick of this shit. And then through that, that kind of reaching that point of no return, I started to do research on the clitoris and found out that I didn't even know about the actual anatomy of my own body. So at 34 years old, for the first time in my life, I learned what the anatomy of the clitoris was. And so anyone who's like embarrassed that they don't know, and like, I didn't know, and how could we know? Like, all of us have had FGM of our educational system, basically, about our bodies. So that's kind of how it started. And it was just really important to be able to address the fact that like people don't know that they don't know this. We all think we know about our bodies, but we don't, and we haven't been studied, and we haven't been listened to, and we haven't been believed. And so I wanted to get away from looking at and objectifying and being like, I see that, I know that, and using the text to get people to like enter their own body and subjectivity and start to relate and identify and connect with the clitoris as a subject position, but also, text is irresistible. So like, if you see it and you can, if you're sighted and you're literate, you can't help read it, even if you don't want to. And so it just had a certain way that it would pull people in, that their defenses that usually come up with anything around, genitals of people identified female at birth, like there's just a wall that shuts them down. But because I didn't use like pink and purple and floral and all of the kind of visual tropes of what this content is, all these people that were like, I like minimalist conceptual text art, and then they're reading about clits and they're like, oh, solid gold clit, oh yeah, we go hard for the clit, and they're just like, what, but, and then, that's just the beginning, but that's a little bit of an answer, I hope.
Mel, you're muted.
I'm so sorry. My cat was meowing, so I had to mute. I apologize. That's a great answer, Sophia. I love that answer. And Maria, I actually just want to go to you real quick before veering over to Stacy. So there were two other women that were featured in the film too, who aren't with us today, who were pretty incredible. And I want you to just be able to talk a little bit about how you found them. But so Kuriyama, who declares herself as the priestess of pleasure, which I loved, and Lisa Diamond, the professor of psychology and gender studies in Utah. How did you find these two women, and what specifically led you to include them in the film?
So when I began doing research on how to actually make a cinematic representation of female sexual desire, I read a book about the science of female sexual desire written by a journalist named Daniel Bergner. And in that book, he focuses on Diamond's research. So she was somebody I found out about very early on. And then in the course of looking for other people in the film, we had T. Chang and Lisa Diamond and Sophia and Stacy as sort of our sort of expert women, I called them, right? The women who are digging deep into this topic. I decided it would be a really good idea if I also focused on the lives of women who didn't speak so easily about their pleasure or their bodies. And what it would do then is it would show how the work of these women, these incredible women, were resonating in the lives of sort of just everyday women walking around. And we found 4 of those women pretty easily. And then I went looking for Kuriyama. I didn't know her name. I didn't know what she looked like, but I went looking for someone like her. And I, reached out to a number of people in the queer community and in, the sort of community in Chicago, and everybody gave me recommendations, and I met her and interviewed her and knew that she had to be in the film.
Yeah, she was incredible.
She was incredible. I'm going to bring Dr. Stacey Dunn into this because one of the big game changer scenes in the film for me that I absolutely loved was the part in the film where you're discussing teaching the class biology of womanhood and having the realization that you, as a highly educated and highly successful woman, didn't know what a full clitoris looked like. And I was floored in that moment because at 42 years old, I did not know what a full clitoris looked like. I was floored. And then I believe the film moves into the part where you're searching for answers, right? And you're in the Grey's Anatomy book and you go into it and you see that, oh, on this page, they talk about the clitoris, one page, and you go to that page and you can't even find the word clitoris anywhere on the page. And it just brought to light the extreme failure of sexual education on all fronts when it comes to the bodies of girls and women. And you did what most of us would do in that situation and should do in that situation, which is you got mad. So you decided to use that to fuel your life's work to not only get, but to give a better understanding of the clitoris. And you were off and running with it. So I would love to hear more about where you are in your mission to legitimize the biology of the clitoris.
No, I think, thank you for essentially summing up my segment really well. So yeah, so I am an educator at the core of what I do, and I teach at a institution that is traditionally all women. And in that regard, I'm educating young persons who are marginalized primarily on this particular subject. And that in itself is very empowering because, you know, obviously I'm imparting this sort of information to them, and together we're working to help create a space where we learn more about the biology of the clitoris and sexual reproductive structures. But to take that a step further, I learn from them, right? I've learned so much from them in this regard on how to talk about these things and how to be more inclusive to make sure that I'm including everybody in the conversation. But specifically what we have been doing most recently, you know, COVID has been horrible in regard to our ability to get into the laboratory and do the research. And so we've been spending a lot of time in trying to develop a more inclusive sexual education programming that includes brain, because our understanding is that when people have more of a foundational understanding of like how our behaviors are informed, that it can help with them making better decisions in regard to their sexual health. In addition to that, we had the students, we still now are recently have gotten back into the lab, have gotten some of the animals back breeding. And the overall goal is to look at these special proteins called ion channels, which are really important for letting ions in and out of neurons, very important for the excitability of neurons. And so we have been trying to characterize those in the mammalian clitoris. I'll also add that, you know, the fact that, yes, Grey's Anatomy has very limited mention of the clitoris, right? But just to take that a step further, like in present day, our textbooks, our science textbooks still do not have an accurate depiction of the internal segments of the clitoris. And so with that, you know, it's not unlikely that most people have not seen or not familiar with the complete structure of the clitoris because we haven't been fully educated on it. And there hasn't been an investment in science to truly circumvent that situation. And to add to that, right, I don't know if you are aware of this, but in scientific research, the default sex for all of our model system is male. So a lot of the studies that are done in science is just based on male biology, which is a huge disservice. And it was about I think in the early 2010s, the NIH did try to initiate some initiatives to enforce people to include female subjects into their studies, but that hasn't really been a overwhelming change in persons using both male and females in their subjects. So, you know, not only is it there's this limitation in, you know, learning about this sex aspect, but then using males as the foundation for our understanding for how sexual biology works. And so that in itself has created the situation in which we're in. And, you know, the goal with my students and I is to not only identify these proteins on the clitoris, but also get a better understanding of just the basic orgasm and pleasure in the mammalian system. So yeah, that's where we're at.
Wow. That is incredible. I want to just come watch you work. Stacey, that sounds so fascinating. I'd love to learn more about that. Deb, you can keep going if you want.
Sure. So I think I'm going to ask Maria about sort of going back to the beginning and really how the film concept came together for you. And I want to hear about the pushback you received along the way of trying to get it out to the public.
So the beginning of the film was really sort of a continuation of a lot of the films I'd made. So I, in my career, and I wouldn't have said this a couple of years ago, but in my career, I frequently focused on the lives of girls and women and looked at the things that got in their way having agency over their lives. And so I made a film about adolescent girls starting in 1997 called Five Girls, and I went on to make another film called In the Game, which looked at, gender and race and life opportunities. And so it was almost a natural evolution of all of my work that I would now sort of look at adult women and look at a part of our lives which we don't get a chance to talk about. And so when I read the book by Daniel Bergner, the kind of upshot of his book, he went all over the country and interviewed all kinds of scientists who were studying female sexual desire. And to kind of, make a point of what Stacey just said, what was unusual about it is these scientists were studying it with female subjects. So they weren't studying men and saying, well, we think it's like this because this is how it's like in men. They were actually studying women. And at the end of the book, the upshot was women have as robust a sex drive as men. They're simply told lies about it to reinforce patriarchal structures. And so two things happened to me as a social issue documentary filmmaker. I said, well, that's just great. We have as robust a sex drive as men. Now, what are we supposed to do with that information when there are so many obstacles, institutional obstacles, religious, cultural, academic, scientific, getting in the way of us even having the knowledge of how our bodies work? And so for me, that was the point at which I began an exploration of what it would mean to make a film about this. And I was very much aware that I didn't want to make a film that sexualized women or objectified women. At the time that I was doing research, I think Netflix came out with a film called Hot Girls Wanted about, young women who participate in the do-it-yourself porn industry. I don't have a problem with that, but that was like when I went to Netflix, they said, well, we've already made your film. It's called Hot Girls Wanted. And so there was the presumption that that was the only thing you could say about female sexual desire, which is that it was in service of male pleasure. And so I wasn't interested in that. And so what was interesting for me is as I began to develop the film and come up with a language to talk about it, I had to get better at that language. And, I really credit Sophia Wallace and Stacey and all of the people in the film in helping me develop a language because people were very afraid of this film. And my people, I mean, the people who fund filmmakers like myself. So the film community. And I would pitch the film to women and they would say, this is really great, but how am I going to talk to my male bosses about this film? And so I had to kind of believe in my heart that there was an audience for this film because for several years, nobody saw the film except people or heard anything about it except people I was pitching it to. And so everybody turned us down. And I got turned down 1,000 times. And finally, when we did our Kickstarter campaign, and you mentioned that video, Mallory, what was so wonderful about the Kickstarter campaign is that the audience that it was out there for this film came together and said, we can't wait to see this film. And so that's what kept my producers and I going because I can't even tell you how much rejection we got. This isn't an important topic. No, we don't do that kind of film, that kind of thing. So I knew from that moment on that there was an audience that really hungered for this film. And so that's what kept me going. At the end of the day, the film gatekeepers of the world never funded the film. The film was ultimately funded by the majority of it by two men, one who has a foundation and the other who came in as an investment equity funder. So I always felt a little sad that I couldn't convince the film community to support this film, because I think it's at the heart of of women's equality and what's a huge issue in our lives, right? And it connects to everything, even what just happened in Britain, where the police blamed women for that woman being murdered and raped. Now it's their fault. It's our fault, right? And I see that all as connected with the lies we're told about our bodies. And so, I love the fact that this film now has an audience, and people can't send me emails. They can't wait to see it. Sophia's heard from a lot of people, but the gatekeepers of the world are still afraid of a film that says women, or all bodies, let's not even just say women, all bodies are entitled to the pleasure they're capable of. That's a really hard thing for, I guess, people to want to get around. And that's kind of sad.
Marie, I thank you for all of that. And I have to say, I really resonated with Sophia's point in the film when you say, like, how is nobody calling bullshit on this? Because as I watched the film too, I kept thinking that over and over again, like, how has this happened for so long? And how are we not more aware of this? And I feel like I grew up as not a sheltered person. I grew up in a feminist environment, which I was grateful for. And yet I still never questioned the fact that how I learned about sex was that it was for the pleasure of a man. I wasn't thinking about my own orgasms when I first started having sex. And so it's crazy to me. And I think what you just said, though, the gatekeeper line is so true and so important, and that it is a systemic thing, and it is something that trickles down. And so thank you for sharing all of that backstory, because I think it's a perfect example of why this has continued for so long. And you bringing up the story of the woman who was murdered in Britain, I just kind of want to bring up another news point as well, which is, the Atlanta shootings. And I read a great article in the New York Times that was literally titled, how many women have to die to end temptation? And this idea of sexual addiction and misogynist violence. So it's taking a dark turn, but I'd love to hear from any of you about your thoughts about that. And at this point, how empowering women can help end that, which hopefully it can. But I don't know if anybody has thoughts they want to share on that.
I have some thoughts. I mean, first of all, I would just like to say to everyone that rejected the film that's like a major industry player, like, okay, cool. You cannot use female bodies in a sexual manner in any of your films. Go make some art. What are you going to make?
Right.
How are you going to advertise it? How are you going to sell it? Like, it's up to you. Like it's like the idea that this is like fringe is so absurd when you think about what film has done to construct this lie, like its particular part of it, and then the fine art world, and then science, and then, I mean, religion, like all these different facets of society, but just specifically for the film to try to treat this as some sort of like marginal, irrelevant, they're not connected to it, they have no stake in it. It's kind of like, straight men who are having unprotected sex with, female partners, not, they don't have any involvement in abortion. Meanwhile, they've caused X amount of abortions. Like, we can't let logic just like disappear because of patriarchy. Like, that's bullshit. And when I think about, the murder, I just think about this, how many shows have I watched about that start with a girl being raped and murdered? Fucking Twin Peaks. I grew up in Seattle. The Green River Killer was like terrorizing like all of us at that time. He was murdering sex workers. Indigenous women being murdered and not even counted. This, and then how we hear about these stories, and then certain women, especially sex workers, trans women of color are just considered totally expendable. So I think until we deal with the fact that the fantasy of like sexually violating and murdering femmes is alive and well and thriving, there's a museum to Jack the Ripper. Do you know what I mean? There's so many shows about serial killers. So this fantasy, like they're identifying with it and they're getting off on it and they're cool with it. And why aren't they checking the rape kits? Because they're in there. The cops are in there. They, you know, their number 2 crime after like police brutality is rape.
Right.
We don't even talk about that, but like this is a problem that is so big. It is so deep, and that's why talking about the clitoris as the right to pleasure, right? Who has a right to pleasure? Who has a right to feel good? That is very much connected to like who has a right to joy, who has a right to rest, who has a right to like their intellectual capacity because they're not just purely in survival mode all the time. And yes, who has the right to intimate justice? Who has the right to not just be basically incapacitated and laying there while someone takes their pleasure in them? They're a doll that's not even alive. I mean, yeah, that's what we have to talk about. And we can't really talk about anything else because until we address this, we're still going to have these laws in the books that basically say, you know, if you're married, your husband can rape you. Doesn't matter how you feel. Oh, you had one drink. Well, it doesn't matter if you were blackout drunk and laying like a corpse. That's not rape. Because basically the idea is any tiny thing that happens, then our bodies don't belong to us anymore. And they are owned again by the patriarchy who will naturally do whatever they want because that's the law. No. So it's like a much bigger thing. And that's why I'm constantly saying this is about human rights. This is about justice. And you can't talk about justice and ignore this part of our lives.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. Deb, did you have another question or you want me to go to the audience?
Let's go to the audience.
Okay. So I think the first question we have is, now that the film is out there, what are some reactions you've gotten from women whose lives have been changed by watching the film?
So I can answer that a little bit, and then I think Sophia has gotten some wonderful responses from people. I have heard from people who range in age from 18 to 80. And they are women and men and everything in between. And I have yet to get an email that says to me, I hated this film. Why did you make this film? This is the worst film I've ever seen. But everybody says, I love this film. Thank you so much for it. When can I see it again? And this response came from people that are my old boyfriends, an 80-year-old man. I know. I was like, yeah. One said, I wish I'd known about this before, and I wanted to say no too, but I didn't. But uniformly grateful, and also the response to many people was like, wow, I never thought of that, or now I need to talk to my mother about it, or my daughter, and that has been my experience. Sophia has had some experiences as well.
Yeah, I just say quickly because I also want to hear from Stacey, because you know you're in the unique position with your students where you get to share, but then have an ongoing relationship and get to like more than just an email like Marie and I get. I'll just say that what's really moving to me is intergenerationally how it's opened up conversations between mothers and daughters, or children and their parents, or parents and their grandparents, and it's just I've gotten feedback that like I've never been able to talk to my mom the way that we talked after we saw this film, and like, thank you.
No, I also say exactly the same thing. One of the most impactful experiences that I've had with the film is to watch my mom's reaction to it and how proud she was of, number one, my contribution to it, and how it helped her with having a better understanding with her own sexual anatomy. And so that was a really impactful aspect of it. But also working with the students, like I said earlier, they teach me, but one of the things that I have been just really fortunate in having the interaction with them and watching them grow in their knowledge in this particular area, and how they have really become advocates in this regard and being able to spread the truth about the clitoris. And in addition, like several of them, because of this work, they went on to pursue PhDs in programs that are centered around sexual biology. And so we're planting seeds on the next generation of individuals who could go out and continue to do this work. And so that has been some of my most proud moments in regards to this film.
And I want to say, I'm sorry, I just want to say one thing that has struck me. when I was making the film and I would interview the subjects or film Stacey's, students talking about it, the openness of all of the participants was amazing to me, and the willingness to share intimate details of their lives. And so in my thinking, I thought that I would get a group of men together and that they would do the same thing. And so I did get a group of men together. I had a male cameraman, I had a male moderator, I hid in the closet. They couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. They couldn't talk about it. All they could do was talk about the first time they watched porn. That was it. And it's not in the film because it's really boring, but it also difficult to me about how much women want to be heard around this. And then as one of Stacey's students said, you know, it makes you sad when you realize how much has been taken away from us that we have to hide. And that's one of the most moving parts of the film for me, when that her students realized how much had been taken from them, right, as women. So anyway, I just want to put that in, the difference between me trying to get men to open up.
Maria, when I was soliciting students for that segment, I had no issue with trying to get an abundance of them. They came running. So how invested they were in the conversation.
And it's just so, just makes you hopeful hearing that about the students. Because again, we were not raised, I can't speak for everybody, I was not raised with those kind of discussions going on. And, you know, actually, Stacey, there was something you said in the film that is important to highlight again, because people still subscribe to false information, right? That we just keep hearing and we keep repeating. And it's that, you know, and we talked about it earlier, that women get pleasure in their vagina. And for at least 70% of us, that is false. That is so false and confusing. And you think something's wrong. And we've got to get rid of all of those falsehoods that we all take in as we're growing up. And Stacey, I actually want to hear from you a little bit more on this, because you did speak towards how the system uses that false knowledge and violence against women, and it could be physical violence or mental violence or just the dozens of microaggressions we get thrown at us every single day to keep women in their place, right?
Right.
So how do we take down that system? It's with the students, right? It's in the next generation's hands.
Right. I'm currently up for tenure, so I should be hearing any minute whether or not I get tenure at Agnes. And one of the things I wrote in my tenure statements was that colleges are incubators for change, right? It is in those spaces where the young people are, you know, going through all these developmental changes. They're, you know, finding out their identities. And so if they are exposed to information that inspires them, it lights the flame for change in our communities and in our world, right? And I think the work that I have been doing with these students has been able to do that. I mean, and even what, Sophia, you came 2015. I think you came to Agnes 2015.
Yeah.
We're still talking about that event.
Really?
Still.
Oh.
And it really just shows how impactful truth could be on students. You know, it really just speaks to that how powerful having honest and deep conversations about things that could result in personal change, right? Because obviously everybody is sorry, allergies are kicking in. Everybody has the opportunity to experience joy, right? And so just being able to tap into that aspect of life is important, and these conversations are so needed. And so again, Sophia, thank you for coming to Agnes, because you don't understand how powerful it was for students, like for real.
It was powerful for me too. Thank you so much for bringing me. It was a wonderful experience.
Sorry, I was trying not to cough.
Allergy.
Really bad.
I thought you were choking up. I was like, oh, I'm getting kind of emotional. Like,
Oh, that's great. Well, Stacey, I love what you said too about you know, planting the seed, and I think that that's so important. And I in many ways, I think that that is going to be the answer to some of this. And I think it's about education, because you know, whether it's you're talking about students advocating and them, you know, hopefully growing up, becoming teachers of some sort themselves. But I even think about that as a mom in some ways too. And I think about, you know, I'm going to talk to my kids so differently about sex than I was to about it. And I, if I have a daughter, I will for sure be teaching her about her own body, but I do have a son and I'm for sure going to be teaching him what the clitoris is. You better believe that. Like, as soon as we start talking about penises, we'll be talking about vaginas, we'll be talking about clitorises, because I also think for, just even kind of, Maria, what you said about like what your ex-boyfriend said, like, I think a lot of men also would want to know more about this. And I think that, we're just, continuing this cycle of disservice to all of us in so many ways. And so, I love that you said that, the phrase about the seed, because I think that's what we have to do at this point. We just have to plant a lot of seeds, and nurture them and watch them grow and just keep talking about this. So thank you, ladies, so much for being here with us again tonight. Unfortunately, I think we're about out of time. But I just want to tell everybody, hopefully all of you who've watched the film or who've watched this tonight have watched the film already. So we didn't give anything away. But if you haven't, definitely go watch it and spread the news. As I said, I demand that everybody watch this film this year. And make sure that you, if you have watched the film, vote for the film too, and give this film a chance to win some cash prizes too. You can use the star rating system on our virtual cinema platform. And I'll just put another little push out there for our second edition of the Repro Film Festival will be happening in August. So we will definitely keep everybody posted about that, because we'll keep talking about this and keep planting those seeds as much as we can. So yeah, with that, thank you all for joining us for tonight's happy hour. It was lovely to see all three of you again.
Thank you very much. This was a lot of fun. It was great to see Sophia and Stacy as well.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, ladies.
Thanks. Great. And thanks again to Great Lakes Brewing Company for sponsoring our happy hours. Tune in on Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern for another live SIF 45 Streams happy hour. In the meantime, please stay safe, stay healthy, keep watching films, and we'll see you next time.
Good night.
Yeah.